My parents tried to sell my inherited house to fund my sister's new home. Share it or you're not my daughter. I secretly sold it to a buyer. Days later, they came with a realtor and screamed, "Stop being so selfish. It's a free house. Either you share it or you're no longer my daughter." I sit at the wooden kitchen table that Grandma Dorothy bought 50 years ago and look at my mother, Rachel. Her face is red with anger. Her hands are shaking. My father, Mark, stands nearby, his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze as cold as ice. Outside the window, Grandma's autumn garden is turning yellow. The same garden where she and I planted roses every spring. "Wendy, are you listening to me?" my mother shouts. "Ginny needs her own house." We found a great option, but we don't have enough money for the down payment. I remain silent, clutching a hot cup of coffee in my hands. 3 months ago, in this very kitchen, I held my grandmother's hand as she took her last breath. Cancer took her in 6 months, but even before she died, she was worried about me. "Say something," my father exclaims. "You live here for free, and your sister is suffering in that tiny apartment." Ginny is 24. She works as a salesperson in a shopping mall and rents a 1-bedroom apartment with a friend. I'm a software tester at a small IT company. I'm 28, and I've never asked my parents for anything. "Mom, my grandmother left me this house," I finally say quietly. "So what?" Rachel comes closer. "You know the terms of the will. If you sell it, half of it has to go to Ginny. It's fair. That word has always had a special meaning in our family. When I was 10 and Ginny was 6, she got a brand new pink bicycle with white ribbons for Christmas, and I got a used computer book from a secondhand bookstore. Mom said it was fair because Ginny was younger and needed more attention. When I was 16, Ginny got a $300 prom dress made of organza and sequins, and I got $50 to buy something more modest. I bought a dress from a thrift store for $18. That was fair too, according to my mother. "You don't understand what family responsibility is," Rachel continues, her voice getting even louder. "Ginny wants to start a family. She needs a normal home, not this box of an apartment. My boyfriend Brad left me 6 months ago, saying I was too boring and predictable. Maybe he was right, but I want to start a family too, only no one asks me about it." "What about my plans?" I ask quietly. My father snorts. "What plans?" "You sit in this old house like a recluse. At least Ginny lives a full life." "A full life?" "Ginny is really popular. She has lots of friends. She's always going to parties, posting selfies on social media. Last week, she broke up with yet another boyfriend, but she's already found a new one. And I work from home. I rarely go out. My best friend is Richie Morgan, whom I've known since childhood. But Grandma Dorothy saw things differently. She had lived in this house for 58 years, ever since Grandpa carried her over the threshold after their wedding in 1963. It was a 2-story Victorian house with a grapevine-covered porch, a large kitchen, and a fireplace room. Grandpa worked for the railroad, and Grandma was an elementary school teacher. They dreamed of having a large family, but only 2 children were born. My father, Mark, and his younger brother, Tommy, who died in Vietnam at the age of 20. When Grandpa died of a heart attack 12 years ago, Mom said Grandma should sell the house and move to a retirement home. "The house is too big for a woman living alone," she said. "Too expensive to maintain." "Wendy will take care of me," my grandmother said firmly. "She's the only one who really understands me." And I took care of her. Every weekend, I drove to her house in my old Honda Civic, which I had bought with my own savings. I helped with shopping, cleaning, gardening. We talked for hours at the same solid oak table that Grandpa had made with his own hands. Grandma talked about her childhood during the Great Depression, when the family lived on potatoes and bread, about how she met my grandfather at a dance in the school gym in 1945. She was wearing a blue dress with a belt, and he was in military uniform. They danced to Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade, and he said he would marry her. And I shared my problems at work, talked about complex bugs in programs, about colleagues who don't understand my ideas. I talked about unsuccessful dates, about how hard it is to find someone who is really interested in more than just my appearance. Grandma listened, nodded, and gave wise advice. "Your mother always loved Ginny more," my grandmother said one day in May as we planted new red rose bushes by the porch. It was warm, and the air smelled of fresh earth and apple blossoms. "I don't know why, but it's not your fault, child." At the time, I argued that Mom just wanted us both to be happy. But deep down, I knew Grandma was right. Mom never hid the fact that Ginny was her favorite. She was younger, prettier, more outgoing, with big blue eyes and blonde, curly hair. I was always quiet, serious, with straight, dark hair and glasses, reading books instead of going to parties. "You have a good heart, Wendy," my grandmother would say, "and a smart head." That's more important than beauty. When my grandmother was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in February, I took unpaid leave to care for her. My mother and father visited her once a week, usually on Sunday after church, sat for an hour, and asked how she was feeling. Ginny came once a month, brought flowers and magazines, and took selfies with Grandma for Instagram. And I was there every day, cooking meals, giving her medicine, reading aloud, just sitting and holding her hand when the pain became unbearable. The last few weeks were the hardest. Grandma hardly ate, slept a lot, but when she woke up, we talked. About life, about love, about what remains after us. "I'm leaving you the house," Grandma whispered a week before she died as we sat in her bedroom overlooking the garden. "But there's one condition. If you ever decide to sell it, half the money must go to Ginny. I want it to be fair for both of you." Fair. Another word that meant something completely different to me and to others in our family. But I agreed because I couldn't refuse my grandmother's last request. The funeral was on a rainy day in June. My mother cried loudly. Ginny sobbed too. My father stood gloomily. I didn't cry. My tears had run out a week earlier when my grandmother died in my arms at 3 a.m. Now my parents are standing in my grandmother's kitchen and demanding that I sell the only place on earth where I was truly loved. "Listen, Wendy." My father sits down across from me, trying to speak more gently, but there is a note of irritation in his voice. "We're not saying you have to move out of here. Just sell the house, give Ginny her share, and buy something smaller for yourself. You live alone. Why do you need such a big house? 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a large garden. It's ridiculous for one person. Why do I need a house where every corner is connected with memories of the only person who understood me? Why do I need a garden that we created together over the years? Why do I need a kitchen where my grandmother taught me to bake her signature apple pie with cinnamon and vanilla sauce? I don't want to sell," I say calmly. Rachel explodes. "And what? Is Ginny supposed to live in that dump for the rest of her life? Just because you're too attached to old things? That old thing was Grandma's home for over 50 years. And now she's dead," my mother shouts, and the words hit me like a slap in the face. "And living people need help." Silence hangs in the air like thunder before a storm. My father stares at the floor. My mother breathes heavily. I feel tears welling up in my eyes, but I hold them back. Crying in front of them means showing weakness, and I did that too often as a child. "A week," Mark finally says, getting up from his chair. "We'll give you a week to think about it. Either you're with us, or I'm no longer your daughter," I finish for him. "Right, Mom?" Rachel lifts her chin, her eyes flashing with anger. Family has to stick together. If you don't understand that, then yes, maybe you don't have the right to call yourself our daughter. They leave, leaving me alone with the echo of their words and the scent of my mother's perfume. I sit at the table staring at the empty cups I didn't have time to clear away. Outside, evening is falling, and the garden is slowly sinking into darkness. At midnight, I still can't sleep. I lie in my grandmother's bedroom, now mine, and look at the ceiling with wooden beams that my grandfather made with his own hands. My mother's words spin around in my head like a broken record. Either you're with us or you're no longer my daughter. I get out of bed and go downstairs, down the old stairs that creak on the 3rd and 8th steps. I know it by heart. The house is enveloped in silence. Only here and there the floorboards creak, having grown accustomed to my nightly walks over the past 3 months. I enter the living room, where my grandmother's large burgundy velvet armchair still stands. She sat in it for the last few months when she could no longer climb the stairs. I sit down on the carpet next to it, as I did when I was a child and came home for the weekend. I was 7 years old when I first noticed the difference in my parents' attitude towards Ginny and me. It was on my birthday in March. My mother baked a cake, a regular chocolate sponge cake from a box mix, not homemade like Ginny's. There was a present on the table, a set of drawing pencils for $9 from the supermarket. "Now you can draw like Ginny," my mother said, kissing me on the forehead. But I didn't want to draw. I liked computers. We had an old IBM at home, and I could sit for hours pressing different buttons, watching what happened on the screen. But the pencils were cheaper than a computer game or a book on programming. 2 months later, on Ginny's birthday, my mother ordered a cake from a bakery, a 2-tiered cake with cream roses and the inscription, "To our little princess." There were 3 gifts: a new Barbie doll, an expensive dress, and a set of cosmetics for children. Altogether, they cost more than $100. "Ginny is special," my mother whispered when she thought I couldn't hear her. "She's so beautiful, so bright." "She'll be something special." What about me? I wanted to ask, but I kept quiet. Even then, I had learned not to draw too much attention to my feelings. My grandmother was the first to notice. When I turned 8, she gave me a real computer magazine, PC World, which cost $5. It was expensive for a magazine, but it had articles about how computers work and how to write programs. "Don't let anyone tell you that you're worse than your sister," my grandmother said, as we sat in the garden under an old apple tree. "You're a smart girl, Wendy, and that's the most valuable thing there is." But at home, I continued to be in Ginny's shadow. When Ginny turned 12, my parents threw her a big birthday party. They invited 15 kids from her class, hired a clown, and bought streamers and balloons. When I turned 16, an age that is usually considered special, my mother baked a cake at home and invited only 2 of my friends. She said I wasn't as sociable as Ginny, so a big party would be unnecessary. The most painful thing was graduation. Ginny's parents bought her a $300 dress, pink with sequins and ruffles, which made her look like a princess. I was given $50 and told to find something modest. I went to a thrift store on Main Street and found a dark blue dress for $18. It was simple in design, but elegant. I spent the rest of the money on shoes at Payless. "You look very nice," my mother said when I came out ready to go. "Simple and tasteful." And Ginny exclaimed, "Wow." When she saw me, and for a moment I thought she was genuinely impressed, but then she added, "Blue suits you. It makes you look less pale," as if my natural paleness was a flaw that needed to be hidden. At prom, I danced with Richie Morgan, who was a tall, skinny guy with freckles who, like me, loved computers more than parties. We had been friends since 1st grade, when he defended me from bullies who laughed at my glasses. "You look beautiful," he said, as we danced a slow dance to Unchained Melody. Really beautiful. And I believed him, because Richie never lied. I get up from the carpet and go to the kitchen, pour myself a glass of water from the tap. The water here has always tasted better than at my parents' house. Maybe because of the old pipes, or maybe because every sip here was associated with love and care. I remember that day in April when I brought home my first real boyfriend, Mike, from college. We had been dating for 3 months, and he finally agreed to meet my family. Ginny was 17 at the time. She had already been through 5 boyfriends and looked 20. "Oh, hi," she exclaimed when we entered the house. She was wearing a short skirt and a low-cut blouse, her hair flowing in waves. I was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, as usual. Mike couldn't take his eyes off her all evening. Ginny told funny stories, laughed her ringing laugh, and flirted effortlessly and naturally. I sat next to her and felt myself slowly becoming invisible. "Your sister is a real beauty," Mike said as we walked home. Very lively, interesting. We broke up a week later. He said we weren't compatible in terms of temperament. But that wasn't the most painful part. The most painful part was that my mother never asked why we broke up. It was as if it was completely predictable. "Ginny has natural charisma," she said once as we were washing the dishes after dinner. "Some people are born with it, and some aren't." "But you have other qualities, Wendy." "What qualities?" I wanted to ask. The ability to be invisible, the ability not to cause problems, the talent to always stand on the sidelines. Grandma saw my pain. When I turned 21, she invited me to a special dinner, just the two of us. She made my favorite beef stroganoff, put candles on the table, and opened a bottle of wine she had saved from Mark and Rachel's wedding. "I want to tell you something important," she said as we sat at the table, "about your parents and why they treat you the way they do." I listened, sipping the wine in small sips. It was sour from being stored for so long, but my grandmother insisted that it was a special occasion. When you were born, your mother was very young. She was only 22. She was afraid she couldn't handle motherhood. You were a calm child. You cried very little, and you started sleeping through the night early on. Rachel thought that meant you didn't need her. Grandma fell silent, twirling the glass in her hands. And then Ginny was born. She was a difficult child. She cried constantly and needed a lot of attention, and your mother decided that meant Ginny needed her more. She concluded that you were strong and independent, while Ginny was vulnerable and needed protection. "But that's not right," I whispered. "Of course it's not right. Every child needs love and attention equally, but your mother didn't understand that, and now that you're grown up, it's hard for her to change that stereotype. In her eyes, Ginny is still that little girl who needs protection." I cried then, long and bitterly, releasing years of pent-up resentment. Grandma hugged me and stroked my hair just like she used to when I was little. "Don't let this break you, child. You deserve love and respect, and someday you'll find people who understand that." That night, I stayed at Grandma's, in the same bedroom where I'm lying now. We talked for a long time in the dark. She told me about her childhood, about how her father drank and her mother beat her, how she realized she had to break this cycle of cruelty. "I didn't want your father to grow up in that kind of environment. That's why I always tried to be fair, to love everyone equally. But sometimes, love is not enough. You also need to understand how to show that love. When my grandmother fell ill, relations in the family became even more tense. My mother thought I was overreacting by taking unpaid leave. "She just has a cough," Rachel said in January when I first told her about the diagnosis. "She's exaggerating to get attention." But when I brought my grandmother in for a follow-up exam and the doctor said, "Stage 4, 6 months maximum," my mother finally understood the seriousness of the situation. True, she understood it in her own way. "Well, at least she won't suffer for long," she said as we stood in the hospital hallway. "And we can finally sell the house." The house. Even then, in the most difficult moment, my mother was thinking about money and how it would affect the family's plans. The last months with my grandmother were both the hardest and the most precious in my life. I learned more about her than I had in all the previous years, about how she fell in love with my grandfather at first sight, even though her parents were against it. He was from a poor working-class family, and she was from a respectable family of teachers. About how they dated secretly for 2 years until they finally got married against her parents' wishes. "Love is worth the risk," my grandmother said as we sat in the garden in May, admiring the first roses. "But it's important not to confuse love with dependence. True love makes you stronger, not weaker." She talked about losing Tommy in Vietnam, about how it affected Grandpa. He became withdrawn, started drinking. She talked about years of therapy, working on themselves together, how they learned to be happy again despite their loss. "Your father never forgave us for being able to move on after Tommy's death. He considered it a betrayal of his brother's memory. Maybe that's why he's so cold. He's afraid to get attached so he doesn't lose again. In recent weeks, when the pain became unbearable, my grandmother often repeated, "Don't let them do to you what they've been doing all your life. You have the right to your own life, to your own choices." Now, sitting in her kitchen at 2 in the morning, I realized that for the first time in my life, I have the opportunity to make a truly independent choice. Not the one that is expected of me, not the one that will be convenient for everyone, but the one that I feel is right for myself. My parents gave me a week to decide whether I will remain faithful to the memory of the only person who truly loved me, or whether I will succumb to pressure and once again become the obedient, convenient Wendy who never causes any trouble. I go out into the garden through the back door. The air is cool, smelling of damp earth and the last summer flowers. The moon lights up the roses that my grandmother and I planted every spring, red, pink, white. They are still blooming even now, in September, as if they don't want to let go of summer. I sit down on the old bench under the apple tree, where my grandmother and I spent so many evenings. And for the first time in 3 months, I feel not sadness, but anger. Pure, bright anger at my parents, who even now, after everything, continue to consider me less important than Ginny. At my mother, who is ready to renounce her daughter for money. On a value system in which the needs of the younger child are always more important than the feelings of the older one. My grandmother always said that anger is energy that can be used for change. The main thing is to channel it in the right direction. A week. I have a whole week to figure out how to make my parents understand the value of their words and actions, so that Ginny learns what true justice is, so that I finally stop being convenient and submissive. I get up from the bench and walk back to the house. A plan is already forming in my head, bold, perhaps even reckless, but fair. Grandma would understand. In the morning, I wake up with a clear head for the first time in weeks. My sleep was restless, but my decision was final. At 8 in the morning, I call Richie Morgan. "Wendy?" His voice is sleepy and concerned. "What happened?" "You never call this early." "Can you come over?" "I need help." "Sure, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Richie lives in an apartment 5 miles away and works as a systems administrator for a small financial company. We've known each other since 1st grade, when he defended me from 3rd grade bullies who took my glasses and threw them at each other. Richie was small and skinny back then, but brave. He walked up to the biggest bully and said, "Give me back my glasses, or you'll be sorry." The boy laughed, but something in Richie's eyes made him return the glasses. We've been friends ever since. He knows everything about my family, about my parents' unfair treatment of me, and my special closeness to my grandmother. When I cried after breaking up with Mike, Richie sat with me in a cafe all night, telling silly jokes and convincing me that Mike was an idiot. "You deserve someone who sees your beauty," he said then, "not just your sister's beauty." Sometimes I feel like Richie has more than just friendship for me. But we've never crossed that line. Too much could be ruined. While I wait for him, I make coffee and toast with my grandmother's homemade strawberry jam. It's a sunny morning outside, and the garden looks peaceful and beautiful. It's hard to believe that yesterday there was drama with an ultimatum. Richie shows up at 8:30, tall, no longer skinny, with dark brown hair and kind brown eyes behind his glasses. He's wearing regular jeans and a t-shirt with the logo of some IT company. "You look terrible," he says, hugging me. "What happened?" I tell him about my parents' visit yesterday, about their ultimatum, about how I can't sleep because I'm thinking about it all. Richie listens attentively, frowning from time to time. "Did they seriously say that you're no longer their daughter if you don't sell the house?" he asks when I finish my story. "My mother said, verbatim, 'Perhaps you have no right to call yourself our daughter.'" My goodness, Wendy, that's blackmail, emotional blackmail. I know, and I've decided to do something about it. I tell him my idea. At first he's surprised, then thoughtful, and finally interested. "That's brilliant," he says finally, "and completely legal. Technically, you're fulfilling the terms of the will, selling the house and splitting the money in half. Only the sale price will be $1 instead of $80,000. Are you okay with that?" "Of course I am. Although..." He pauses, twirling his coffee cup in his hands. "What happens after that? When my parents find out? I don't know. Maybe they'll really stop talking to me. But you know what? Maybe that's even better." Richie looks at me intently. "Are you sure? Family is family, after all. Family is people who love you unconditionally, not those who set conditions on their love. We discuss the details. Richie has enough savings to pay all the taxes and fees associated with buying the property. I will live in the house as a tenant. We will draw up a lease agreement for a symbolic amount, say $100 a month. This will cover the utility bills and allow me to stay here, where I feel at home." "What if my parents take us to court?" Richie asks. "On what grounds?" "The agreement is completely legal. I have the right to sell my own house to anyone for any amount. But they can accuse us of conspiracy, of circumventing the terms of the will." "The terms of the will are very clear. If I sell the house, half of the proceeds go to Ginny. I'm willing to give her half of $1, 50 cents. Richie laughs. "Imagine your sister's face when you give her two 25-cent coins. For the first time in many days, I laugh too. I laugh sincerely from the bottom of my heart. At 9 in the morning, I call Harold Wilson, the lawyer who drew up my grandmother's will. He is a 53-year-old man with a gray mustache who's been working in this city for 30 years and knows all the legal intricacies. "Miss Cooper," he says when I explain the situation, "technically, your plan is perfectly legal. The will does not set a minimum sale price. It only requires that the proceeds be divided in half. However, your family can challenge the agreement in court, arguing that the sale for $1 does not reflect market value and is an attempt to circumvent the will. What are the chances that the court will rule in their favor?" "Not very high," Wilson admits after a pause. "The law does not oblige the owner to sell the property at market price. You have the right to give the house away, sell it for $1 or $1 million. The main thing is that the buyer is solvent and the deal does not contain any signs of fraud." "Does it?" "No. Mr. Morgan is your old friend. He has a stable income and is able to maintain the property. The motivation for the sale is your personal business. Let's agree to meet tomorrow at Wilson's office to draw up all the documents. He warns that the procedure will take several days. It is necessary to verify the ownership rights, draw up a purchase and sale agreement, and register the transfer of ownership. A week is a realistic time frame," he says. After talking to the lawyer, I call my parents. My mother picks up the phone after the third ring. "Wendy, have you made a decision?" "Yes, Mom. I'm going to sell the house." I hear her breathe a sigh of relief. "Thank God. I knew you would come around eventually. Ginny will be so happy. We've already looked at a few houses, and there's one that's wonderful." "Mom," I interrupt, "the deal will be finalized in a week, on Friday after lunch. So soon?" "What about the realtor? What about the appraisal?" "A buyer has already been found. The deal is almost done." "Who's the buyer?" My mother's voice becomes suspicious. "Someone who appreciates the house for its history," I say, technically not lying. "Wendy, we need to know the details. This concerns Ginny, too. You'll find out all the details on Friday. You can come at 3 o'clock in the afternoon with the realtor to complete the transfer of keys. My mother wants to object, but I quickly say, "I have to go, Mom. Goodbye." I hang up the phone and feel my hands shaking. The first step has been taken. There is no turning back. Richie is still sitting at the kitchen table, staring thoughtfully out the window. "Are you really ready for the consequences?" he asks quietly. "I don't know," I answer honestly, "but I'm definitely not ready for a life where I'm constantly being manipulated." What if they really stop talking to you? This question torments me too. Despite everything, despite years of unfair treatment, they are still my family. My mother, who gave birth to me and cared for me, even if not as much as I would have liked. My father, who, although cold, was never cruel. Ginny, who, despite all her selfishness, is still my younger sister. Then I'll find out what true freedom is, I finally say. Richie nods. You know, I always thought you were too good for this world. Maybe it's time to show that you have teeth. We spend the rest of the day preparing for tomorrow's meeting with the lawyer. Richie brings a statement from the bank showing his income and savings, and I prepare all the documents for the house. In the evening, he stays for dinner. I cook Grandma's signature beef stroganoff from a recipe I know by heart. Remember how Grandma always gave us candy when our parents weren't looking? Richie says, twirling pasta on his fork. She said children have a right to small pleasures. I think she would have approved of our plan. I think so, I agree. She always said that justice is more important than convenience. After dinner, we sit on the porch and look at the stars. The September air is cool, but not yet cold. In a week, my life will change dramatically. Either I will gain my freedom or I will lose my family, or maybe both at the same time. Richie, I say suddenly, what if I'm making a mistake? What if there's a way to resolve this peacefully? He is silent for a long time, looking at the stars. Wendy, how many times have you tried to resolve issues with your parents peacefully? How many times have you explained, asked, tried to find a compromise? I think about all these years, about conversations with my mother about injustice, about trying to explain my point of view to my father, about tears, persuasion, begging. Many times. And what has changed? Nothing. Some people only understand the language of force, Richie says softly, not cruelty but force. When they see that you have boundaries that cannot be crossed. Maybe he's right. Maybe it's time to show that I also have principles that I'm not willing to violate for the sake of someone else's comfort. The next morning, we go to the lawyer. Wilson's office is located in an old building in the city center, next to the courthouse. The walls are covered with diplomas and certificates, and there are stacks of files on the desk. Everything is ready, Wilson says when we finish signing the documents. The purchase will be registered on Friday at 1 p.m. After that, Mr. Morgan will become the official owner of the property. What about taxes? Richie asks. The taxes on a $1 sale of real estate are minimal, but the gift tax... Wilson looks at me. You are essentially giving Mr. Morgan a property worth about $80,000. This may have tax implications. What kind? If the transaction is classified as a gift, you may be taxed on the amount that exceeds the annual tax-free gift limit. That's currently $15,000 per year. Panic sets in. I didn't think about taxes. I don't have $65,000 to pay the government. But, Wilson continues, noticing my alarm, there is a loophole. If you can prove that the sale was made at fair market value at the time of the transaction, there will be no tax liability. How do you prove that? Get a real estate appraisal from a qualified appraiser. If he determines that the house is worth $1, there will be no tax issues. But the house is worth much more than that. Not necessarily. Market value is the amount that a buyer is willing to pay and a seller is willing to accept. If you are willing to sell for $1 and Mr. Morgan is willing to buy for $1, that is the market price at the time of the transaction. I look at the lawyer in amazement. It turns out that the law has many more nuances than I thought. Of course, Wilson adds with a slight smile, there will be questions from the tax authorities. You will have to explain the motivation for such a low price, but if you tell the truth, that you are selling to a friend for personal reasons, it is perfectly legal. We leave the office with the feeling that everything is becoming real. The deal is done. The documents are prepared. All that remains is to wait for Friday. In the evening, Ginny calls. This is unexpected. She rarely calls me just like that. Hi, sis. Her voice is excited and joyful. Mom told me you finally agreed to sell Grandma's house. I'm so happy. Hi, Ginny. You can't imagine what a wonderful house we found. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a large garden, and it's close to work. True, it costs $120,000, but with my share of the sale and a loan, we'll be able to afford it. $120,000. She's counting on $40,000 from the sale of Grandma's house, and she'll get 50 cents. Ginny, I say cautiously, have you thought about the fact that Grandma's house isn't just money? It's memories, family history. Oh, Wendy, why are you at it again? She laughs. The dead don't need houses. The living need decent housing. You're smart. You understand that. Finally. After talking to Ginny, I sit in the dark kitchen for a long time. She doesn't even try to understand my position. For her, Grandma's house is just a source of easy money. Memories, emotions, sentimental value, none of that matters in her world. Maybe I'm really doing the right thing. Maybe it's time to show her that not everything in life comes easily and for free. There are 3 days left until Friday. 3 days until the moment of truth. Friday comes very quickly. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Richie and I officially transfer the title at Wilson's law office. The procedure takes 20 minutes. We sign the documents, pay the state fee of $1.50, and it's done. Richie is now the official owner of the house, and I become a tenant under a contract for $100 a month. How do you feel? Richie asks as we leave the courthouse. Like I jumped out of a plane without a parachute. I answer honestly. I still don't know if it will open. It will open, he says confidently, and if it doesn't, I'll catch you. We return home, now his home, to prepare for the meeting with his parents. We agree that Richie will meet them himself, and I will show up a little later. I want to see their first reaction when they realize what has happened. At 2:30 p.m., I hide in the shed behind the house, from where I can see the porch. My heart is beating so hard that I feel like the whole street can hear it. Part of me is still horrified by what I'm doing. These are my parents, my family, and I'm preparing to deal them the biggest blow of their lives. But another part of me, the part that has been harboring resentment for years, rejoices at the prospect of justice. At 3 o'clock sharp, my father's blue Toyota pulls up. Behind it is a red Mazda CX-5, probably the realtor's. My mother, father, and an unfamiliar woman in her 50s in a business suit with a folder in her hands get out of the cars. Mom looks elated. She's wearing a new blouse and her hair is neatly styled. She is clearly counting on the successful completion of the sale. Dad is reserved as always, but I notice that he rubs his hands from time to time, his habit when he is nervous. They approach the door and Mom rings the bell. They wait. She rings again. Finally, the door opens and Richie appears on the threshold. He is wearing jeans and a t-shirt. He clearly feels at home. He has a cup of coffee in his hands. "Good afternoon," he says politely. His mother is surprised at first, then confused. "Excuse me, where's Wendy?" We agreed to meet here at 3. "Wendy will be here soon. You must be her parents?" Richie smiles and opens the door wider. "Please come in." They enter the living room. I move closer to the window to hear the conversation better. "Excuse me," says the realtor. "Who are you?" "I'm Deborah Smith from Prime Properties." "Richie Morgan," he shakes her hand, "the new owner of the house." Silence, a long, heavy silence. "What did you say?" My mother's voice rises. "I said I'm the new owner of this house." "I bought it yesterday." My father steps forward. "Where's Wendy?" "Like I said, she'll be here in a minute. Please have a seat. No one sits down." All 3 stand in the middle of the room and stare at Richie as if he were a ghost. "Young man," the realtor says in an official tone, "there must be some confusion. We are here to finalize the sale of the house. The owner is Wendy Cooper." "Was the owner," Richie corrects her calmly, "until yesterday." He walks over to the table, picks up a folder, and takes out some documents. "Here is the purchase agreement, registered yesterday at 1 p.m. in the district court. Everything is completely official. His mother grabs the documents and begins to read them, at first quickly, then more and more slowly. Her face changes from surprise to indignation. $1? She squeals. You bought this house for $1? Yes, Richie confirms. Wendy offered a very attractive price. The father snatches the papers from his mother's hands. He reads, rereads, and turns the pages. That's impossible, he mutters. This house is worth at least $80,000. It used to, Richie says. Now it's mine. For $1. This is fraud, his mother explodes. The deal is invalid. Wendy is a minor. Mrs. Cooper, your daughter is 28 years old. She is fully competent and has the right to dispose of her own property. The realtor reads the documents over her father's shoulder. Her face becomes increasingly puzzled. Mr. Morgan, she says cautiously, could you explain the motivation for such a low price? Wendy wanted to sell me the house for a symbolic amount. That's her right. But why? My mother shouts. Why would she sell the house for $1? Richie shrugs. You'll have to ask her that. At that moment, I decide to make an appearance. I come in through the back door and walk through the kitchen to the living room. Everyone turns to me. Hi, Mom, Dad, I nod to the realtor. Miss Smith. Wendy, my mother rushes toward me. What is this? What have you done? What you asked me to do. I sold the house. For $1? To your own friend? That's crazy. It's my house. Or rather, it was mine. I had the right to sell it to anyone I wanted for any amount I wanted. My father rubs his temples. Wendy, explain. Right now. What is this circus? I sit down in my grandmother's chair. It's not mine anymore. But Richie nods to show he doesn't mind. I look at my parents calmly, even though I'm trembling inside. You gave me an ultimatum. Either I sell the house and split the money with Ginny, or I cease to be your daughter. I chose the third option. What third option? My mother doesn't understand. I sold the house and I'm ready to split the money with Ginny. Half of $1 is 50 cents. Here, take it. I take 2 25-cent coins out of my pocket and put them on the table. This is for Ginny. It's her legal share according to Grandma's will. My mother looks at the coins, then at me, then at the coins again. Her mouth is open but no sound comes out. Are you out of your mind? My father finally blurts out. That's not money. Ginny needs real money for a house. Who said I have to provide Ginny with a house? I ask quietly. I fulfilled the terms of Grandma's will. I sold the house and divided the proceeds in half. Technically, everything is correct. Technically, my mother shouts, you ruined the whole family's plans for the sake of your technical correctness. I protected my home from people who wanted to take it away. Take it away? We wanted you to share. This is family. Family doesn't give ultimatums. Family doesn't say, either you do what we want or you're not our daughter. The realtor clears her throat cautiously. I'm sorry, but I don't think my services are needed here. Maybe I should leave. No, says the mother sharply. Stay. This deal will be canceled. On what grounds? Richie asks calmly. On the grounds of common sense. No one sells a house for $1. They do, the realtor interjects. Rarely, but it happens. Usually between relatives or close friends. If the deal is done right, it's totally legal. So you won't help cancel it? My dad asks hopefully. I'm not a lawyer, but from what I can see, everything is done correctly. At that moment, another car pulls up to the house. It's Ginny. My mother immediately goes out onto the porch and waves to her. Ginny rushes into the house like a hurricane. She's wearing a bright red dress. Her hair is loose. Her makeup is perfect. She was on her way to a party. What's going on here? She asks, looking at everyone in turn. Mom was yelling something about $1 on the phone, but I didn't understand. Your sister, says my mother, gasping with indignation, sold Grandma's house for $1 to this guy. Ginny looks at Richie, then at me, then back at Richie. I don't understand. What does that mean? It means, I say, that instead of the $40,000 you were counting on, you're getting 50 cents. I point to the coins on the table. Ginny is silent for a few seconds. Then her face turns red. "Are you kidding me?" she whispers. "I'm fulfilling the terms of Grandma's will." "What the hell terms?" Grandma wanted us to split the money from the sale, not pennies. Grandma wanted fairness. And fair is when I can live in the house she left me without fear of being kicked out of it because of your whims. Whims? Ginny's voice becomes piercing. "I want a normal home. Is that a whim? And I want to keep Grandma's house." "That's not a whim either. But I'm your sister. How can you do this to me? How can you demand that I sell the only home where I was loved for the sake of your plans?" Ginny takes a few steps toward me, and I see something frightening in her eyes, a wild rage I've never seen before. "You bitch," she hisses. "You selfish, greedy bitch." "Ginny," Dad takes a step toward her. "No," she pushes him away. "Let her know the truth." She's always been strange, but I didn't think she was this mean. She comes even closer. I get up from my chair, preparing for conflict. "You know what?" Ginny says, and there's something ominous in her voice. "I'm going to sue. I'm going to challenge this crazy agreement. And if the court doesn't rule in my favor, then—" She falls silent, clenching her fists. "Then what?" I ask. "Then I'll find another way to get what's mine." Is that a threat? It's a promise. Richie stands up and comes closer. "Miss Cooper, I suggest you calm down." "Who the hell are you?" Ginny snaps at him. "What right do you have to interfere in family matters?" "I am the owner of this house, and I have the right to ask aggressive people to leave my property." "Aggressive?" Ginny screams. She swings at Richie, but he easily catches her arm. "Don't," he says calmly. "Let go of my daughter," her mother yells. "Gladly," Richie says, releasing Ginny, as soon as she stops waving her arms around. Ginny steps back, rubbing her wrist. Her eyes are filled with angry tears. "This isn't over," she says, looking at me. "I won't forget, and I won't forgive." "Never." "I know," I reply quietly. The mother approaches me. Her face is pale with anger. "I don't recognize you," she says coldly. "Where is the girl I raised?" "The good, obedient girl?" "She grew up," I reply, "and learned to defend herself." Defend herself? From whom? From her own family. From people who think I'm less important than others. My mother stares at me for a long time. Then she turns and walks to the door. "Let's go," she says to my father and Ginny. "There's nothing for us to do here." My father stops at the door. "Wendy, you can still fix this. Cancel this nonsense and act like an adult." "I am acting like an adult, Dad. I make my own decisions and take responsibility for them. What about your family?" "What about your family?" "Family is those who accept you for who you are, not those who force you to choose between them and your principles." He shakes his head and follows his mother. Ginny stops at the door. She turns to me. "You'll regret what you've done." Maybe. Or maybe, for the first time in my life, I won't regret it. She leaves, slamming the door loudly. A minute later, we hear the cars driving away. Richie and I are left alone in the silence of the living room. The realtor has disappeared somewhere, probably slipping away during the argument. "Well, that's it," I say, sinking back into the chair. "How do you feel?" "Like after surgery. It hurts, but it had to be done." Richie sits down on the sofa opposite me. "Do you think they'll really take us to court?" "Probably. But Wilson said they don't stand much of a chance. What if they find a way?" I think about it. About the possibility of losing the house, about legal fees, about my parents going to extreme lengths to get revenge. "At least then I'll know I fought to the end," I say finally, "that I didn't give up without a fight." Richie nods. "You know, I'm proud of you. Today you showed more courage than most people show in a lifetime. Courage or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. We sit in silence, listening to the old clock on the mantelpiece ticking. Outside the window, dusk is falling. The day that changed everything is coming to an end. Richie, I say suddenly, what if I'm really wrong? What if family is more important than principles? What if principles are what make us human? He replies. What if without them we are just biomass, ready to submit to any pressure? Maybe he's right. Maybe today, for the first time in my life, I behaved like a real person, one who has boundaries that cannot be crossed, one who is willing to pay for her convictions. Time will tell if it was worth it. The lawsuit came a month later. My parents hired James Killington, an expensive, ambitious lawyer with a reputation for not giving up easily. The lawsuit claimed that the sale of the house for $1 was fictitious, aimed at circumventing the terms of the will and harming the heirs. I sit in Harold Wilson's office reading the legal documents, and I feel my blood run cold. The terminology is complex, but the gist is clear. They want to have the deal declared invalid and force me to sell the house at market price. What are our chances, I ask. Wilson takes off his glasses and wipes them. 80 to 20 in our favor. The law is on our side, but Killington is cunning. He may find procedural violations or convince the judge that the agreement is contrary to the spirit of the will. What does that mean, the spirit of the will? It's when the court decides that the letter of the law has been followed, but the intent of the testator has been violated. In your case, they could argue that your grandmother wanted to provide for both granddaughters, not give one the opportunity to bypass the rights of the other. My hands are shaking as I sign the documents for the court defense. Wilson is only charging me half his usual rate, saying that it's interesting to work on an unusual case. But even half his rate is too much for my budget, and then it gets even worse. On Monday, my boss, Dave Thompson, calls me into his office. He is a 35-year-old man with a perpetually tense face who always has 3 cups of coffee on his desk at once. "Wendy, we need to talk," he says when I walk into his office. I sit down across from him, trying to appear calm. Over the past few weeks, I've been distracted at work, thinking about the trial, my parents, and what will happen next. "We have a problem," Dave continues. "Customers are complaining about the quality of testing for the latest release. Several critical errors slipped past you. I can explain." "In addition," he interrupts, "HR has informed me that a lawsuit has been filed against you. Is that true?" My heart is pounding. I knew it would come up sooner or later, but I was hoping it would be later. "Yes, it's true. But it's a personal matter. It doesn't affect my work." "Wendy, do you understand that our company works with financial data? We can't afford to have employees with legal problems. It's a matter of customer trust." "Dave, I've been working here for 3 years. I have an excellent reputation." "You had an excellent reputation. You've been doing a terrible job for the last 2 months, and now there's a lawsuit." He hands me an envelope. "This is your termination notice. We're giving you a month's notice and severance pay." I leave the office on shaky legs. A month's notice and $2,000 in severance pay is all that's left of my 3 years of work, and the legal costs have only just begun. In the evening, I call Richie. He arrives in half an hour with Chinese food and beer. "Everything will be fine," he says when I tell him about my dismissal. "You have a roof over your head and we'll find you a new job." What if we don't? What if my parents win the lawsuit? What if? "Wendy," he takes my hands. "Breathe. One problem at a time." We sit at the kitchen table, the same one I sat at with my parents a few months ago. At the time, it seemed like the worst thing that could happen. Now I realize it was only the beginning. "Richie," I say suddenly, "what if I'm really wrong? What if they're right, and I'm destroying my family because of my stubbornness?" He looks at me for a long time. "Are you happy now?" It's a strange question. I lost my job. I'm facing court. My family won't talk to me. But I feel like myself, I finally say. For the first time in my life, I feel like myself. "There's your answer." The trial is scheduled for early December. During these months, I managed to find a new job at a small startup company that develops mobile applications. The salary is a third less, but the atmosphere is much friendlier. My new boss, Sam Rodriguez, says he doesn't care about my personal problems, as long as the code works. The day of the trial is cold and gloomy. I put on the dark blue suit I wore to the interviews and arrive at the courthouse half an hour before the start. My nerves are stretched to the limit. My parents are already there. They are sitting on the other side of the room with our lawyer, Mr. Killington, a tall, thin man with gray hair and an expensive suit. Ginny is there too, wearing a bright red dress that catches the attention of everyone in the room. When our eyes meet, my mother looks away. My father looks at me sadly but does not approach. Ginny pretends I am not there. Judge Margaret Williams is a woman in her 60s with a stern face and gray hair tied back in a bun. She reads the case documents carefully, taking notes from time to time. My parents' lawyer speaks first. Killington is eloquent and persuasive. He talks about distorting the spirit of the will, about a fictitious agreement, about moral obligations to the family. "Your Honor," he says, gesturing, "the deceased grandmother intended to provide for both granddaughters. The sale for a symbolic amount is an obvious attempt to circumvent this desire." Then Wilson speaks. He is less theatrical, but more specific. The will does not set a minimum sale price. The defendant has the unquestionable right to dispose of her own property. The agreement is drawn up in accordance with all legal requirements. I am called as a witness. My heart is beating so hard that it seems to be heard throughout the courtroom. "Miss Cooper," Killington asks, "do you believe your grandmother would have wanted you to sell the house for $1? "My grandmother wanted justice," I reply. "She saw how my parents treated me my whole life. I think she would have understood my motives. But she specifically stated in her will that the funds should be divided in half. And I did. 50 cents is half a dollar. Miss Cooper, do you realize that you have deprived your sister of the opportunity to buy a house? I realize that I have protected my own home from people who wanted to take it away from me." Killington tries to provoke me, to make me say something rash, but I hold my ground. When he finishes, Wilson asks me a few simple questions about my relationship with my grandmother and the circumstances that led to the decision. Ginny is also called as a witness. She talks about her plans to buy a house and how important the money is to her. She cries, real or fake tears, it's hard to tell. "Wendy has always been selfish," she says through her tears, "but I never thought she was capable of this." Finally, the judge announces a recess to deliberate. We wait in the hallway for an hour. Richie holds my hand, and that's the only thing keeping me from losing control. "Cooper v. Cooper," the clerk announces. We go back into the courtroom. Judge Williams looks tired. "This is an unusual case," she begins. "On the one hand, the defendant's actions may seem unfair. On the other hand, the law does not oblige the owner to sell the property at market price." My palms are sweaty. "After careful consideration of all the circumstances," the judge continues, "the court concludes that the sale agreement is legal. The defendant had the right to dispose of her property at her discretion. The lawsuit is dismissed." I almost fall over with relief. Richie hugs me. Behind me, I hear my mother crying loudly. As we leave the courtroom, my father stops me. "Wendy, you won. Now we can forget all this and start over?" I look at him. This man who raised me but never really knew me, who loved me in his own way but allowed my mother to do whatever she wanted with me. "Dad, I want to have a relationship with you, but only if you and Mom admit that you've treated me unfairly my whole life." He is silent for a long time. "We always tried to do what was best. For Ginny, you always tried to do what was best for Ginny, for both of you." "No, Dad, and until you admit that, we can't have a real relationship." He walks away without saying another word. The next 2 years pass quietly. I work at a startup that is gradually growing and thriving. My salary is raised twice. I live in a rented house in Ritchie, paying a symbolic amount, but I have my own space and peace. My parents don't get in touch. Sometimes I see them at the supermarket or on the street. They turn away or pretend not to notice me. Ginny moved to a neighboring town and found a job as a hotel manager. I hear from mutual friends that she is still angry with me. It hurts. Even after 2 years, it hurts to realize that my own family chose pride over love. But the pain gradually dulls, and something else takes its place. An inner peace I've never felt before. Everything changes in the spring when Ritchie proposes to me. We sit in the garden under the apple tree, the same one where I sat so many times with my grandmother. The roses are blooming, and the air smells of fresh grass and hope. Ritchie nervously twirls a small box in his hands. "Wendy," he says, "we've known each other for 20 years. We've been living together for the last 2 years, and I've realized that I don't want to live without you." My heart is pounding with excitement and joy. I always knew there was something more than friendship between us, but I was afraid to admit it. "Ritchie." "Let me finish," he smiles. "I know this is a difficult time, that you have a lot of problems with your family, but I want to be there for you. Always. Officially." He gets down on one knee and opens a box. Inside is a simple but beautiful ring with a small diamond. "Wendy Cooper, will you marry me?" I cry. With joy, with relief, with the realization that not all my choices were wrong, that there are people who love me for who I am. "Yes," I whisper through my tears. "Of course, yes." He slips the ring onto my finger and it fits perfectly, as if it were made for me. That same evening, I make another decision. I withdraw $20,000 from the bank, money I've saved over 2 years of frugality and a new job. It's not half the market value of Grandma's house, which is about $40,000. It's a quarter. But it's fair, considering everything that's happened. I write a letter to Ginny. "Dear sister, 2 years ago, I gave you 50 cents as your share of the sale of Grandma's house. Technically, it was correct, but perhaps not fair. I am enclosing a check for $20,000. It is not half the market value of the house. It is a quarter. I consider this amount fair, given your behavior during the conflict and the threats you made against me. The money comes with no strings attached. You can buy a house, invest in your education, or spend it on travel. It's your choice. I don't expect your gratitude or forgiveness. I just want to close this chapter and move on. I wish you happiness, Wendy." I send the letter by regular mail. A week later, the check is cashed, but Ginny doesn't respond. She doesn't call or write. I don't know how she feels, and honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. The wedding takes place in the fall in my grandmother's garden. It's small and intimate, only our friends and a few distant relatives. We don't invite my parents. It hurts, but it can't be any other way. After the ceremony, we sit on the porch, watching the guests dancing on the grass under the fairy lights. Ritchie holds my hand, and I feel completely happy for the first time in many years. "You know what I'm thinking?" he says. "What?" "That Grandma would be happy." "She always wanted you to be happy. I think she would have approved of everything we did." "Even the $1 part?" I laugh, especially that part. I look at the garden where Grandma and I spent so many evenings talking about life, love, and what really matters. Now this is my new home with the person who loves me unconditionally. Family isn't just the people you share DNA with. Family is the people who accept your decisions, even when they seem crazy. Those who stand by you when the whole world is against you. Those who love you, not for what you do for them, but simply for who you are. I have such a family. Maybe not the one I was born into, but the one I chose. And it's the best decision I've ever made. Sometimes, when I'm working in the garden or cooking in my grandmother's kitchen, I feel like I can sense her presence. It's as if she's watching me with a smile, proud that I've finally learned to stand up for myself. "Thank you, Grandma," I whisper at times like these, "for everything."